Say live. Can you see? Oh, there it is. The broadcast is live. Here we are, the Health, Love, and Life Show. This is Coach Arnie, and tonight we have a special guest. Am I here? Judy Miller. So let me just get into a little introduction here for Judy. She was a highly successful CPA, corporate finance executive who, unknown to her coworkers, lived in terror of the night and the possibility of sexual assault. Happily married with children, her fears made life a modern-day nightmare. But worse, she had no idea why. There was nothing in her own personal background that would warrant this near constant state of fear. In her book, A Path to Love, Forgiveness, and Transformation, she relates the extraordinary path she took to discover the roots of those fears. It's an amazing journey that Judy was guided to take that brought the exact right people together in the exact right order to the right, a wrong committed decade ago before her birth, but which left its shadow on her soul. Today, you're going to learn and hear from her about the spiritual journey that unfolded, which opened her heart, enabled forgiveness across multiple generations, and showed her the perfection of all that we are. Welcome, Judi Miller, to the Health, Love, and Life Show.
It's great to be here, Arnie. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I appreciate you. We had a great conversation a few weeks ago, and there's your book there in the background. And so I hope make sure you talk lots about it. I'm going to run through some questions for you, and just feel free to talk about whatever you need to talk about to make your point, because I know when you and I talk, we could have gone on for a long time about the different things that you experience and how you can relate to so many different people that are struggling out there with their own fears and about life and their past and forgiveness. And actually, I've been, have you heard of the book? Here, it's right here. Love Yourself by Kamal, Kavikan?
I haven't.
It's a wonderful book. I actually did a recording of the book. It's so small, but it's one thing in there. It's all about loving yourself and how the simple act of saying that because most people, when they say it, they don't believe it.
I totally agree with you. I think that's one of the most important things that we need to do as humans is to love ourselves.
Yeah. But so the idea is, and I'm a big, I journal about it every day since I've reread it, because I should give this book out. It finally came back to me. I was handing it out. Keep going to different people. But here's the funny part. It would go to different people who never read it. And I would say, hey, do you have my book? And they go, oh, yeah. And they never read it. And then it came back to me. And finally, then I actually, in an hour or so, a couple weeks ago, I read it to my wife, because I said, you should read this. She goes, why don't you read it to me? So I read it to her. And she really enjoyed it.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll definitely have to look for it.
Yeah, look it up. It's a great book. Well, let's just get started here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to write this book.
Why I decided to write this book. So, Arnie, I was looking at your website, and it looks like you're definitely an adventurer. You've done some amazing things in your life, right?
I have.
Yeah.
I just got back from the Grand Canyon not even 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. And have you ever felt true terror in your life when you're on these adventures?
True terror. I felt anger. I would say almost 3 years ago, I was up there for my very first night crossing that everybody thought I needed to have somebody with me because it's through the wilderness at night.
Mm-hmm.
And so I invited a friend that was introduced to me through another friend from Colorado, and much younger than I, and supposedly much more experienced than I. And we got to the north rim of the Grand Canyon after about 8 hours of hiking, and he decided to quit at midnight. And my ego got a hold of me at that point, meaning that I'm a mercy person. I love people. And I felt sorry for him to the point that I thought I needed to nurture him versus telling him, you're on your own. Mm-hmm. You're an adult. Deal with it. But I destroyed my trip to take care of him, mm-hmm. even though he didn't really need it. Right. He was a big, strong man. He could have taken care of stuff, but that's where my ego got a hold of me. So I was very angry to the point of crying when I got home, literally crying.
Wow.
Yeah. So fear, you know, I'll give you a, for instance, Judy, that night I was heading down the trail at midnight and I've been there a few times, and I noticed a sign that says, be on the lookout for mountain lions. And I thought to myself, mountain lions? Really? And yes, there are mountain lions down the Grand Canyon, because the next time I went, we actually ran across another runner on the trail who said he saw literally maybe an hour or so behind us a mountain lion killing a deer right off the trail.
Wow.
How's that?
Close. Yeah.
So I was doing a lot of Googling of mountain lions in the Grand Canyon. So I think about it, and I do. And since then, I carry a knife with me in the wilderness, because they're out there. But I'm a storyteller. So to get back to your question, probably, I don't know. Maybe the main fear is disappointing myself if I don't make it.
Right. Okay.
How's that?
It's great. So, Arnie, like many children, I had fears as a child. I was actually afraid of drowning. And the reason I asked you if you ever faced terror, I was terrified of the night, but it was beyond just monsters under the bed or monsters in the closet. It felt like terror. I could actually sense and feel different energies, and I didn't know if they were there to help me or to harm me. I was also afraid of being assaulted. So as you could imagine, as a child, these feelings were extremely confusing. So I actually never mentioned to anyone, including my parents, this fear of being assaulted until my book actually came out. So Arnie, night after night, I would literally crawl into bed, pull the covers over my head, and I would recite the Lord's Prayer over and over again until exhausted, I would fall asleep. And this fear and this terror continued well into my 20s. I actually started my career as a CPA, then went to work in finance in the healthcare industry for over 20 years. So during the day, I had this very traditional lifestyle and very traditional occupation. But at night, I was terrified of what I couldn't explain. So I actually met my husband, and we got married, and we had 2 incredible kids. And in the exhaustion of raising my children, working 40 to 50 hours a week and commuting 2 to 3 hours a day, in that exhaustion, that fear and that terror actually went away. But then my kids grew up, they went off to college, and the house became silent. And in that silence, the fear and the terror returned. It felt like someone or something was always standing next to me, or if there was eyes staring at me from across the room. I would actually wake up in the middle of the night clutching in fear at my husband, terrorized of what I couldn't explain. And soon we both began to lose sleep. So Arnie, around the same time, I actually started to bleed uncontrollably month after month. And my doctor recommended that I get a hysterectomy. And I was terrified of this surgery, and I couldn't understand why. I had worked in the healthcare industry for over 25 years, and I trust modern medicine. But Arnie, it felt like the same terror that I had as a child and the same terror that returned to me as an adult. So a very good friend of mine recommended that I read a book called Light Emerging. And Light Emerging was written by Barbara Brennan. She was actually a former NASA physicist, and she studied the human energy field. And what she learned, she was actually able to heal people. So here I was, literally days before my surgery, Googling healers near me. And as I sat across from my healer for that very first time, I literally felt like a click of a lock. My entire life was finally locking into place. And I didn't know the role that that healer actually played in my family's history. So my healer helped me heal after my surgery. And then we started to explore this uncontrollable fear and terror that I had every night. So we actually started talking about my childhood. Was there any experiences that I had as a child that might have triggered this fear? But nothing came to light. Then we started to talk about my parents. We know that we inherit so many things from our parents, right? The color of our hair, the color of our eyes, so many physical characteristics. But the science of epigenetics tells us that we could actually inherit the pain and the trauma from our parents. And not even our parents, but our ancestors. Wow. So they've shown with Holocaust survivors that the pain and terror that they experienced could actually be passed down to their children and their grandchildren. There was actually studies done with mice where they would introduce the smell of cherry blossoms and then zap the mice on the feet. So Arnie, as you could imagine, after a while, just the scent of cherry blossoms would trigger the same fear and terror in these mice.
Sure.
But what was amazing was that the mice's children and their children just the scent of cherry blossoms would trigger the same fear,
Wow.
even though they had never been zapped and they were never exposed to the father that was zapped. So, Arnie, those are mice. Just imagine that in people. So, the fear and the terror that I experienced each night actually wasn't my own. It was actually a cellular memory from my mother, the trauma that she experienced as a child that I never knew about until this book came out. So they say every female baby is born with 2 to 3 million of their reproductive eggs at birth. So on a cellular level, when your mother was a child as well as a young adult, you were actually in there as an unborn egg. So you actually experienced on a cellular level her traumas as well as her triumphs. So that pain and that terror and that fear that I felt every night was actually just the cellular memory of the pain and the terror that my mother experienced. And Arnie, I don't want to give away the whole book, but there is a shocking ending. There's actually a connection to the very healer that I trusted to heal me. And Arnie, in that moment of revelation, I could have felt fear, anger, or betrayal, but I didn't. All I felt was the love and the perfection of the universe. And I saw how all of our souls are truly interconnected across lifetimes and how we could heal in any moment.
Yeah, because you answered my first question, which was there any evidence that you had for this fear? And you answered it right there, which no, but it was in your past. It was in your family history.
Exactly.
Generational pass down.
Mm-hmm. And many Native American cultures actually say we could actually heal 7 generations back and 7 generations forward.
Wow.
So we experience all of the triumphs as well as the traumas of our ancestors.
That's amazing. So Judy, who is this book for?
So, I realize that my story might sound a little unusual, maybe a little uncommon to some people, but I do believe it holds a promise for us all. So for most of my life, I actually felt different, like I didn't belong. I felt like I was incomplete somehow, and I felt that I was unworthy, always having to prove myself over and over again. And no matter what I did, I still didn't feel like I was enough. I actually felt like I was nothing. But what I learned was that in the nothingness, we could be anything that we want. So Arnie, what I mean by that is when we drop our stories, our labels, and our judgments, we could truly emerge as our true and authentic self.
No, and I agree because, we may have discussed this before because the 2 greatest fears across the planet, regardless of culture, are I'm not enough and I'm not going to be loved. Mm-hmm. And which you just shared right there. And I think once we realize that we are, and we are enough and we are loved, whether it's through ourselves or through, in my world, it's God, and in somebody else's world, it's whatever their superior being might be. But once we realize that we are loved and we are good enough, mm-hmm. There is no limit to what we can do. And once we are loved, there's no reason for judgment. There's no reason to do the things that we see around us today. Because most of that is coming from people that are hurting. Because hurting people hurt people.
Absolutely.
It's just what they do. Because, it's like crabs. When they capture crabs in the Northeast, you catch one, you throw it in a bucket or a basket, and you put a lid on it, right? Mm-hmm. You catch 2, you can leave the lid off. You know why?
Why?
Because the crabs will try to escape. But when one crab goes up, the other crab is going to grab it and pull it down.
Wow.
Sometimes it'll pull it down so hard, Judy, it'll break off its claw.
That's amazing. Wow.
So something genetically is inside that crab, right? Mm-hmm. It says, don't let that person do something that's not normal. And we're surrounded by people like that.
Absolutely. And you know what you said before, you're absolutely 100% correct. We're already born worthy. We have nothing to prove. And when we let go of that, life becomes so much easier.
That's a learned fear. It's a learned fear that you're not good enough. It's a learned fear that you're not loved. Every baby in the world, well, hopefully every baby in the world feels love. Mm-hmm. Every baby.
Right.
And it's a shame if they don't. But so these are all learned things over time, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, I believe a lot of the loneliness and the isolation that we feel, especially now,
Sure.
I believe the loneliness and isolation is not because we're isolated and separate from each other. I believe it's because we've become disconnected from our creator, the God of our
Yep.
understanding, but also we've become disconnected from our very selves.
Absolutely.
So many people have abandoned themselves emotionally, physically, spiritually.
Well, just in my world, let's take the world that I live in, that as an adventure guy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There are many times when I go out in the wilderness at night, which I think is special. Is it fun to do it with other people? Yeah. But at the same time, if I schedule something, Judy, I'm going. And if the person wants to join me, great. It magnifies the experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I know people that won't go unless somebody else goes with them. So many times they're disappointed because they wait for others, almost like to give them permission to go.
Right.
And so they're not giving themselves permission to live. And we need, and right now, especially, we need human collisions, right? We need that. And Zoom and all these other things are nice, but we need that. But at the same time, if we had more love for ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
don't you feel that there would be, gosh, because the suicide rate and everything is just off the charts right now. It's just horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel that being worthy is just, well, we don't teach it for sure. And many don't experience it. They don't experience that loving, that unconditional love of themselves.
Mm-hmm. And Arnie, you know, in my book, I describe different situations or different experiences that I have with love, and I'd love to share it with you and your listeners.
Sure, go.
So the first one, it actually started all on Good Friday. Literally, I was sitting in church waiting for Mass to start, and this overwhelming sense of love just literally descended upon me. And I can't even describe it in words. It was every sensation of love you could imagine, multiplied 1,000,000 times. And it was just coursing through my entire body, every cell in my body. And Arnie, the reason I wanted to share that with you is because you were saying that so many of us feel unloved, but if we knew how much we were loved, we would never doubt ourselves ever again.
I agree. That is, I mean, you know, somebody was sharing it with me today. There's nothing like being in love with somebody that loves you that loves you the same. Something like that. But when I heard that, I thought to myself, because in my world, as with God, I know that God loves me unconditionally.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I start. Now it's up to me to love myself unconditionally, because I find it's very difficult for people who don't love themselves to love other people.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct.
I mean, they want the connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
But whenever it gets beyond connection towards love, they'll almost create what's the word here I'm looking for? They'll create a scenario where they'll create conflict to create separation, because they're getting too close to the possibility of love.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a scary place for a lot of people, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I'd love to share another story with you.
Go.
It's so
In about let's take a break now for about 10-15 seconds.
Sure.
And then we're going to then hold that thought, and we'll come right back to it. This is WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, Radio, TV, and Podcast, Internet Talk Network. All right, go ahead, Judy. Continue that thought.
So many stories in my book actually sound like near-death experiences. You know, oftentimes you hear people feeling this overwhelming sense of love, seeing this bright white light, etc. But I wasn't dying. I was literally dying with my eyes wide open, for lack of another word. And Arnie, what did I want to tell you?
No, you were saying this you wanted to share a story about a client or
Oh,
experience.
that's right. Sorry about that. So
That's okay.
so on this journey, I do realize the reason I was trying to explain it is because so many of my experiences sound like a near-death experience. That's
Right,
what
right,
I was
right.
trying to say. But my mother-in-law, so I felt different for most of my life, I mentioned to you. So
Sure.
of course I attracted a man into my life that was totally different.
Mhm.
He was different culturally, racially, spiritually, religiously, totally different. Because we know through the law of attraction, what we think about, what we focus on is what we actually bring to ourselves. So
Yep.
when his mother died, I was grieving her, and I don't know how I was communicating with her. I'm not a medium, but she came to visit, and she literally showed me every scene and every interaction that I had with my husband and his family. And Arnie, it went by so quickly. It went by in seconds. And often many people who have these near-death experiences describe it in a very similar way. And what I saw was because I felt different, I made myself different. So that was the world that I created, because our outer world is just a reflection of our inner world.
Sure.
So it's exactly what you were saying. I brought this upon myself because I felt different.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's almost like those movies where it's just like a quick flash of the scenes kept
Mhm.
rolling by for you there.
Exactly like that.
But we do it. I mean, it's that old sixth sense thing. We get, I can't explain it. I mean, it's like the feeling we have in our gut, right? Which I'd say,
Mhm.
to me, it's God's voice to me when I feel it in
Mhm.
my gut versus here. But then, as my youngest daughter is pregnant right now, she's going to have a baby here in a couple of weeks. And what are the two areas that they look most at for development? Here and the gut.
Wow.
Because the gut actually has more neurons than the brain does.
Hmm. And some people believe that we actually have three brains: our brain, our heart, and our gut.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Because physiologically we have two for sure,
Hmm.
and there are. I mean, it's an amazing thing to study with the gut, and that's why for centuries, listen to your gut. That didn't just come because somebody made it up. That's because you get these weird feelings that we all do from time to time, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's before we make a phone call or ask somebody out on a date or have to make a major financial decision, right? We
Hmm.
get these weird feelings. Sometimes it's in our gut, sometimes it's in our throat, sometimes it's in our head. We don't know, right?
Right.
And I'm always aiming for the one that's in my gut because that's the one that tells me I better listen.
Hmm. And Arnie, I believe our bodies tell the truth. I believe that our minds sometimes create stories that are not
Mm-hmm.
always true. Our bodies
Yes.
are infinitely intelligent.
Yes, I agree 100%. And that's what's so amazing about some of the work that you're doing or have experienced and sharing here. Let me ask you another question here. Why don't we just back up a step? Give us a kind of a higher level summary of your book for people.
Right. So a higher level summary. So I had fears as a child, and I learned to let them go. I learned to let them go when I realized that everything is perfect and everything is whole. Because in that moment of revelation, when I saw the connection that I had with my healer, I realized, as I mentioned before, that we are unconditionally loved and accepted.
Mm. So you came, did your did you feel unconditional love before that from others?
So I felt a lot of unconditional love, like many people do, and many people don't, from my parents.
You did.
My parents showed me how to live in an
Okay.
unconditional loving way.
Yeah, because it's funny, and I even shared this with my wife one time. I said, I know that I've been loved unconditionally once in my life.
Mhm.
It was my grandmother. And I share this stories. I've shared it in workshops. I could have been a mass murderer and she would have loved me.
Mhm.
Wouldn't have mattered. I didn't have to perform for her. I didn't have to get good marks in school. I didn't have to do all these certain things. And even though my mom loved me to death, but I had to perform. My dad, I didn't know because I never heard the word love until much later in my life.
Mhm.
But that's why I was always I was lucky that I had good teachers and coaches around me who shared with me, the things that I was looking for as a man, as a young man, especially, that I didn't get at home. And I know there's a lot of that around there today, because when you're pushing a 50% fatherless home situation, especially here in the United States, it's quite an epidemic of problems for young men. And if you look around right now, we've got a problem. And so I know what it feels like to not have unconditional love in your life. I mean, I knew my grandmother, but it's one thing, because when I coach people in relationships, and I'm sure you know this, boy, it's an amazing thing, Judy, to find somebody that loves you unconditionally and you love unconditionally.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
It's almost the highest level of love you can achieve versus, Gandhi love. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with you. And I felt a lot of unconditional love from my parents. But Arnie, like I mentioned, I felt different. So I've got a lot of feedback from the world around me for being different. So
can you unpack that just a little bit?
Sure.
What do you mean by different?
So I was actually born in Trinidad, which is an island in the Caribbean. Okay. And I moved to the US when I was very young, and I didn't look like other people. This is not about race or discrimination, but I didn't look like other kids in the neighborhood. So, kids are kids. I was also, meaning that, they say things. I was also born with 11 fingers. I also had this ability to sense and feel different energies because of this terror that I had of the night. So when you combine all of those things, people say things, do things that are not always the kindest.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that explains a lot right there. But again, I love unpacking this stuff as well. Mm-hmm. That explains a lot, especially with children, because children are and you're not as old as I am, but children are naturally curious anyways. So they're going to say things, because I was told things that I would never have gone home and told my dad, because he would have gone ballistic. I wouldn't even thought about it. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I just dealt with it. And, but children are curious, and they can be incredibly cruel as well. But I don't think they get up every morning and say, I'm going to go out there and be cruel to Judy today.
Oh, I fully agree. And I think, that made me stronger as a person.
Sure.
Like I said, I felt like it was nothing, but I came to the realization that in that nothingness, I could be anything I wanted.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. Now it makes more sense what you said originally. Mm-hmm. It makes much more sense, because you were at a place that only you could be at that point.
And, Arnie, I'm just going to come out and say it. Like I said, a lot of my story sounds like a near-death experience, and some of the experience might sound a little unusual or a little uncommon. So I'm just going to share it with you, because it's so on topic of what we're talking about. But I had a lot of downloads, a lot of different experiences that some people might call spiritual. Mm-hmm. And in one of those experiences, I saw that when we transition, and you hear this in near-death experiences where people see their life in review. It was talking about those seconds that you were talking about earlier, right? Yeah. And in this particular situation, in my particular situation, I saw that at the point of transition, we actually get to decide, what is the one thing that we want to come back and heal? What would we do differently if we could? And we get that opportunity, so we could really never get it wrong. And that's how I came to the realization that we're unconditionally loved and accepted, and how we could heal at any time. So it was truly a miraculous experience to be able to see that we are not judged by the Creator, and that we do get to come back and heal.
I love that, because I was having lunch with a guy that did the Grand Canyon Tuesday, and with a friend of ours and a coach as well. And he sat across the table from me. He goes, Arnie, what would you do differently than now that you're back? And I told him, I knew I could name off like 3 different things. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like that near-death experience says, okay, starting today, I'm going to do this and this and this. Mm-hmm. Right?
Absolutely. That's why I said it's like dying with my eyes wide open. And, with these revelations and the experiences that I've gone through, my life has totally changed. It's miraculous.
How?
So a lot of my story is about letting go of our stories, our labels, and our judgments, right? And
Yeah.
when you let go of your stories, labels, and judgments, you experience every moment as if for the first time, because you're
Wow.
experiencing everything without those labels. And when you do that, it's like children. Everything is wonderful. Everything is joyous because you're discovering it every time over and over again as if it were for the first time.
And isn't that really how we're supposed to live? We're supposed to have a childlike spirit, not be childish.
Right. Absolutely. And you like your adventures, that you were talking about before.
Right.
And many people don't know, I actually trained in martial arts for 15 to 20 years. So I'm
Oh,
like a fourth
wow.
degree black belt. And I loved sparring.
You.
I would get beaten up like crazy, but I loved sparring because it kept me in the moment. And I was reading Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. And in the very beginning, he was talking about adventure sports. That people often feel so alive because they are so present in the moment.
That's let me share with that. That's a wonderful point. You know why? Because somebody asked me, was it a couple weeks ago? Because this is kind of the big hiking, and then people are kind of frustrated now with all the COVID and being at home. They're looking for adventure and to get it out to do something, right? So and the weather's getting better, obviously. But on that point, I was saying, when I'm out there for 15, 20 hours, I don't have any music on. Nothing. Whereas I'm listening to books and things when I'm training. But when I'm out there, I am totally 100% present in the moment. And that's what I think I enjoy the most about it.
And I think that's how we're supposed to be living every moment.
Don't you think? God, if that's the way life was all the time, right? Like that now, Judy? I'm jealous.
But Arnie, we all have to let go of our stories.
No, I know we do.
And there's different ways to do that. So you were talking about before, we have over 60,000 thoughts a day, Arnie. 95% of them are the same ones we had yesterday and the day before. And 80% of them are quite negative. And the reason is because as humans, we're actually hardwired to focus on the negative aspects of a situation because it used to be critical for our survival. When we used to have to hunt and gather, it was critical.
That's exactly right. I just read that. Oh my God, we're like right on the same page here.
But we don't live in that reality anymore.
No.
So we have to retrain ourselves. We have to retrain our minds.
That's exactly right. So let me ask you this. You say this book is about love, forgiveness, transformation. What does forgiveness mean to you, Judy?
So forgiveness, there's so many different definitions of forgiveness. For me, it's really, really simple. It's to forgo or to let go of. So we're all going to have painful and unwanted experiences. We could either experience it once, or we could literally play it over and over in our minds, hundreds, even thousands of times until it becomes stuck, until it becomes our identity. So for me, forgiveness is just letting go of those contracted negative stories that no longer serve us. So Arnie, it's not about condoning the actions of another person in any way. It's just getting us out of that cycle of victimhood so we can move forward with our lives.
Yeah. I mean, that's, it's one of them, people think that there's a cost to forgiveness and they don't understand that it's free. It's completely free.
Yeah. And I love
Nobody has to earn it. Nobody has to earn it from Judy, right?
No.
You just freely give it away.
Absolutely. And you said it before, sometimes the person that you have to forgive the most is yourself.
That's the hardest one, isn't it?
Right. And a lot of times it's just the stories we tell ourselves.
Sure. We're not worth it. We're not worth forgiving. And so it's awful hard. If you're not worth forgiving, then how do you expect your significant other, or if you're dating, for others to truly love you unconditionally?
Right.
If you don't feel worth it. So then what do? We perform even more for that love, don't we?
Absolutely.
Which gets us in even more trouble.
And I don't believe we get love from outside of ourselves. I don't believe we get love from other people or other things.
No.
It comes from within.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Because most people are struggling in their own world as well, trying to get that love, aren't they? So
absolutely.
Demanding that from them only creates more and more conflict.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, before we were talking about how our bodies tell the truth and how infinitely intelligent our bodies are. So, Arnie, whenever I feel a contraction in my body now, I know it's truly a blessing. It's a
Mm.
blessing because my body is telling me that there's something that I need to heal, that I need to let go of.
Define contraction.
Something tight, something tight.
Really?
Yeah, that's a
So,
contraction for
I
me.
mean, you're an athlete. I mean, so now we're on a different level here. Now that
Oh,
I know
no.
I used to coach wrestling as well. But so when you feel like when you've been working out and you get, the muscle, the bicep or the hamstring or some muscle contracts, do you feel that, or does it feel like a cramp? What do you feel?
So that's a little bit different. So when I sparred, I literally would get beaten and bruised all over,
Sure.
and it felt great.
Well,
It
yeah,
felt
because
great.
you're,
It
no,
felt
I
good to
know
feel
that feeling. I know that feeling. I
Mhm.
do.
Right.
Today it's more like grinding up a 5,000-foot hill, for hours at a time, and every muscle in your body is aching, but you've got this great ear-to-ear grin on your face, right?
Right. So a contraction for me is when I feel a heaviness in my body,
Mm.
right?
Okay. Makes sense.
But it's my body's way of saying it's time to heal, it's time to release something.
Do something.
Exactly. And Arnie,
Take action.
it's happening right now on a global scale. There's so much contraction
Uh,
happening on the planet, not the pilot, the planet.
oh my
But
God, it's ridiculous.
between in our relationships, with riots, the
Everything.
fires, the hurricanes, COVID, everything, we're contracting.
We're
But
also
it's
sensitive.
exactly, but it's the universe's way of saying, Arnie, it's time to heal. It's time to heal our relationships.
Right.
It's time to heal the planet.
Well, and I think a lot of it is because there are times when I'm a big fan of vulnerability, because to me, vulnerability is power. Shared vulnerability. So if we're with people and instead of me being coach or the leader, and I can share with them if I have fear, if I have worry about something, and how can we do this together, and bring the group together more, where we can all kind of solve the problem versus, no, I have to do it because I'm better than you.
Mhm.
And I think we have to get beyond that. And I think it does. And you just said it a couple minutes ago. It does start with love and then forgiveness as well. Because, gosh, it's so hard to love without loving yourself and without forgiving yourself.
Right.
And to me, the strongest emotion out there is love.
Absolutely. I believe actually there's only two emotions. Everything else falls into these two broad categories, fear and love. And fear for me is just that contracted energy, wishing that we could change the past and worried about the future. And when we let go of all of that, there's only love that remains.
So, because I have I have a few patients that are, younger, mostly, but it affects everybody, with anxiety. It is like mind-boggling what they think about, especially young people. What are your thoughts on that?
I fully agree with you. And I have personal experience. And sometimes that anxiety and that stress that they feel, I hate to say this, but sometimes it's the expectations they place on themselves.
Mm.
No one is standing over them saying, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's the expectations that they've created for themselves. And some of it could be that they've learned from externally, but it's the expectations we all place on ourselves that make us feel unworthy, stressed, etc. Most of it comes from that.
Yeah, and I have a client. I'm thinking about him right now. He actually just sent me a text. And raised by wonderful people. I've known him for, 16 years. Yeah. And his parents are wonderful. But they've he's got authority bias nailed to a cross in his life. And so he has such a fear, which is what we work on most of the time, of those in authority, that he is in constant fear.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to get him to focus on the present moment and how good he's doing and stack those good decisions and that he's making every day and how he's learning. But this has been beat into his head by his parents.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think as parents, I mean, granted, I never read the book How to Be a Great Dad. I just missed that book, or missed that class too. So we just do we do what we do, or do the best we can do. For the most part, most parents do. But sometimes we go overboard trying to make our kids perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to be perfect is the greatest problem, cause, I think, of all this anxiety, because it's just impossible.
And it's getting back to what we said before, that we're already born perfect. We're already born worthy, that we don't have to prove anything.
Yeah, we don't. And trying to be perfect, it creates the fear of not being enough ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not enough, then gosh, then I'm not going to be loved. My girlfriend's not going to love me. My boyfriend's not going to love me. I'm going to let my parents down. That was me. I'm going to let my mom down, right? Yeah, because it's never good enough.
So Arnie, I worked in corporate finance, which was very competitive. And
Mm-hmm.
for so much of my career, I had to prove that I was worthy. And I actually moved up quite quickly up the ranks. But I drove myself crazy trying to be perfect, trying to prove myself. And, I got to a point where I just stalled, literally stalled, no matter what I did. My company sent me to go to Harvard for their executive program. They had a lot of faith in me, but somehow I just got to that level that no matter how hard I tried, nothing would work. And Arnie, when I let go, when I say let go, I don't mean surrender and do nothing. You do the best that you can, and you come from a place of love. You come from your heart, you lead from your heart.
Yeah.
And then it's just surrender. And then all of a sudden, things started to become easier when I started to let go.
Yeah, I'm going to give you the next few minutes to finish and tell everybody where they can find all these. But you just steered a thought in my head. One of the things that I like to use in workshop is the idea of unconditional love, of taking that heart that you just mentioned right there, sticking it out in front of you, in front of somebody, trying to love them unconditionally, and risking the fact that they could slap that thing right out of your hand whenever they wanted to. But to me, that's the only true way of experiencing love, besides love. And you got to do that with yourself. That means if you go out and take a risk and quit your job and go backpack across Europe, you got to be okay with that. And then look back on it and go, wow, I did that, versus, oh, I can't believe I did that. What a dummy. And just continually beat yourself up about it. Mm-hmm. Or whatever you might do. But sticking your heart out in front of you and letting your heart guide you is the ultimate, in risk.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. But you know something? When you're not willing to put your heart out there, you're never going to experience
Never going to know, are you?
Exactly.
You're never going to know what true love is and all the good things that come with that, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Judy, this has been wonderful. And we didn't even get through a third of your questions. I had a feeling that was going to happen anyways after our last conversation. So why don't you take the next couple minutes, share with everybody where they can find all your information, your book, anything you want to share with folks.
Sure. So you can find out all you want to know at Judi, Judi Miller, Miller.net. My book recently launched. So as part of the launch program, there's actually 5 free bonuses that you can get on my website with the purchase of the book from 5 of my favorite teachers and mentors. Dr. Sue Morter, Janet Atwood, Deborah Poneman, Marcy Shimoff have all contributed things on happiness, success, love, etc. So if you buy the book, please take advantage of those freebies. And then Arnie, just as a gift to your listeners, on my website, I also have a free ebook called Awaken the Creator Within. No purchase is necessary, just a free gift. And you can find all of my social media handles there as well.
Well, Judy, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And probably, I don't know about Cece, but I know this was one of the fastest shows I ever did. I looked at the clock and I said, holy cannoli, we're done. It just zipped on by. So that, to me, that means you're good. So
that means you're an excellent host, Arnie.
No, well, I appreciate you. 'Cause what I'm interested in this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. because I think you're exactly right. We need this today more than ever because we're really struggling out there. And we need lots of Judy Millers out there reaching out and just loving people.
Arnie, that's so kind of you to say. You're doing a great job changing the world. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Judy. I appreciate you. Let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. You have a great night.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.